What's the fallout from Donald Trump's latest batch of tariffs? The US has hit many countries with new levies, causing shock and confusion. Trump argues it'll reduce the US trade deficit. But is that true? And what are the long-term implications for the global economy? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Adrian Finighan. Around the world, countries are scrambling to cope with the latest wave of tariffs imposed by US President Donald Trump. More than 60 countries are on the list, some with levies as high as 50%. The move has unleashed shock, confusion, and financial volatility. The US stock market took a hit, and a jobs report revealed slower than expected economic growth. Trump didn't take the news well. He promptly fired the head of US labor statistics, accusing her of, quote, manipulating the data, and that's led to new concerns about the politicization of information. But beyond that, how will these tariffs affect the global economy? Will this controversial foreign policy tool backfire on Trump? We'll explore all of that with our guests in just a moment. But first, Katia Lopez-Horayan reports.
It hasn't been a good week for U.S. President Donald Trump. Shortly after unveiling sweeping tariffs of varying rates on 68 countries, the value of U.S. stocks dropped. On and off tariffs, higher and lower rates on virtually the entire world is shocking trading partners and making investors nervous. Business owners are holding still, unsure of how the widespread tariffs will affect their prospects or their bottom line.
The president likes to keep people on their toes, keep countries guessing as to what is likely to happen next. It's also putting pressure on those countries that have yet to sign a trade agreement that there will be consequences if they don't.
Trump has long argued tariffs will make the U.S. economy stronger. But a jobs report showed weaker than expected growth, with 73,000 jobs added in July, instead of more than 100,000 analysts had predicted. Trump responded by firing the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
We're doing so well. I believe the numbers were phony, just like they were before the election, and there were other times. So you know what I did? I fired her. And you know what? I did the right thing.
Critics warn the move sets a dangerous precedent, using independent agencies for political gain and risking data legitimacy.
It is disturbing to say, but the chickens are coming home to roost on Donald Trump's destructive trade war, and the American people are paying the price.
Trump's attempts to interfere in the Federal Reserve, long respected for its political independence, is also raising alarms. Though his demands to lower interest rates have been mostly ignored by its chairman, Jerome Powell. The new round of tariffs are set to go into effect on August 7th, and many are bracing for impact. Higher tariffs will likely mean higher prices for everyday goods, and analysts say U.S. consumers will ultimately foot the bill.
The big question here is really, where are we going, where are we right now with the supply and demand of labor? We saw fewer people participating in the workforce here in the latest month. We know that both legal and illegal immigration have slowed sharply in the United States. And in the past, they had been a key source of new workers being added to the workforce.
Abroad, some businesses are turning to other countries, hoping to lessen their reliance on the U.S. Now the world is watching to see what this will mean for the global economy. Katia Lopez-Horayan, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests. From Washington, D.C., we're joined by Harry Broadman, economist and a former chief of staff, President's Council of Economic Advisors, and Assistant United States Trade Representative. From Shizuoka in Japan, Seijiro Takeshita is Professor of Management at the University of Shizuoka. And from the U.S. city of Baltimore, we're joined by Steve Hanker, Professor at the Johns Hopkins University, Distinguished Senior Scholar at the Mises Institute. He was also a Senior Economist on President Reagan's Council of Economic Advisors. Gentlemen, Welcome to you all. We've discussed Trump's tariffs several times on Inside Story in the last 6 months, and almost without exception, the trade experts like you that we've talked to have said that they think that tariffs, at least the way in which the Trump administration is applying them, are a bad idea. Harry, do you agree?
Well, I think, tariffs have their appropriate place. I think the biggest problem that the U.S. and now the global economy is facing is the interruptions that Mr. Trump is doing without any kind of rules-based system, which is what the world trade system is supposed to be operating on. And as many viewers know, the U.S. was, the champion of a rules-based trading system. He's flying that regime in its face.
Seijiro, is Trump playing poker with the U.S.'s and the global economy? What do you make of the speed at which the Trump administration is doing these deals on trade?
Well, actually, you use a very politically correct word called trade, but I think a lot of people in Japan and elsewhere is feeling that this is just a bullying game, bullying poker, and calling the bluff. And there is no logical consistency on the number or the background of his argument or his regime's argument. And for that reason, I think, for example, not only Japan, but particularly countries like Brazil or Canada must be really, be puzzled at where and how and why these numbers are being, talked about in the market. So I think this is just, as you pointed out, it's a game of poker with a lot of bullying that's going ahead in this international arena right now as we speak.
Steve, what do you make of all of this? Here's the thing. What are the chances of Trump's tariffs and trade deals somehow coming good, that the U.S. economy will be better than ever, that Americans will become richer, that American industry and manufacturing will experience something of a rebirth, that somehow President Trump and his advisors in the White House know something that the rest of us don't?
Well, I think what you just stated is the spin out of Washington, D.C., which is all rubbish. I'd like to make a couple of points. Number one, these aren't deals anyway. They're oral agreements that Trump has made. Nothing is in writing. There's no text. They've been very unprofessional in the way they've been handled, as Harry indicated. And we're basically operating in a state of enemy. That's derived from the Greek, of course. It means lawlessness. Trump can change whatever these deals happen to be, which we don't know, by the way. He's a very mercurial personality, and we don't know. Everything is under a shroud of secrecy. And even if you think you know what Trump is thinking today, he could very well change that thought tomorrow. So we have what's happened here is a situation where you have what's called regime uncertainty. He's changing everything, all the rules, and breaking all the rules all at once. And the regime has become uncertain. And I think the markets aren't factoring this in enough at all. The only time we've had regime uncertainty in the United States before was in the New Deal with Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The New Dealers were changing everything at once. And as a result, the economy basically froze up. The Great Depression lasted much longer than would have been the case if the New Dealers hadn't been creating all these changes and all this regime uncertainty that came in. From 1929 until the start of World War II, investment in the United States went to zero because of regime uncertainty. And so that we're sailing into troubled waters. This is really just absolutely the beginning of a disaster.
Harry, do you agree with that? You were Chief of Staff of the President's Council of Economic Advisors. Where is Trump getting his ideas from? Who's telling him that these tariffs and trade deals address the trade deficit and make the American economy stronger? I mean, what's the logic behind the White House's tariff strategy? Is there any logic? And why Trump's focus on the trade deficit? Is the rest of the world pardon my language, screwing the US on trade, as President Trump so eloquently put it?
Yeah, he's a very eloquent man. I'm from New York, so I understand his type of eloquence. No, I mean, it's a very odd set of behaviors by the president of the largest economy of the world and the economy that has paved the way in the post-depression era for open markets and, as I said in the beginning, a rules-based trading system. And as Stephen has said, there is no rules in place. There are no guardrails in place. And it's gotten to the point now where he's using tariffs, which are trade instruments, to try to castigate other countries for their domestic political problems, such as Brazil. So I don't know. I wish I knew who is advising him. We can imagine who is advising him, but I'm not sure that he's open to receiving advice well. He certainly seems to be playing from a playbook that is his. And what's interesting is his playbook in this regime is quite different, I think, on the margin from what he did the last time he was in the White House. Don't forget, he was the champion of revising the NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement that encompassed Canada and Mexico, of which I was one of the lead negotiators, to creating a whole new agreement called the USMCA. And now he wants to take that apart. So without a rules base, without sort of a proper steering mechanism in place that is transparent, that businesses, consumers, and workers and the rest of the world can follow, it's very difficult to do trade and make investments in a country like this. And as I say, it's the world's largest economy. So it's extraordinarily troubling, I think. This is not just rhetoric on our part, but it's actually, you can see from the data, the wagon is coming off the road.
Seijiro, you and I have been talking to each other on television for what, 30 years now. You were still playing rugby and working for an investment bank when we used to talk regularly about the markets all that time ago. On Friday, global stock markets fell. The Dow Jones, the S&P 500 down more than 1%, the Nasdaq down more than 2%. Now, stock markets had rallied after Trump announced a 90-day pause on his reciprocal tariffs back in April. What are the markets telling him now? To what extent has their continued rally since that time back in April somehow emboldened him?
I think, the answer to that is what the two gentlemen today has depicted, which is basically market is still looking at short-termism. They're looking at numbers. For example, in Japan, 25% tariff declined to 15%. Therefore, automobile manufacturers have a lot more breathing room, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the importance here is whether to look again about the logical consistency of these numbers, but people haven't really gone into that. They're looking at numbers and just comparing, making a comparative analysis with the analysis they made before. But what one must look at is the long-termism of the situation. For example, investment, yes, in short run, in order to mitigate the negativity of this tariff, there will be more production in the United States. Japanese automobile manufacturers are doing exactly that. But in the long term, will it really benefit the Americans and the whole, free world community? The answer is absolutely no, in any sense. I mean, if you look at it from the perspective of investors' point of view, in a country that is running into anarchy, away from democracy towards, autocracy or almost like dictatorship, and in a country that is showing a lot of, factionalization, and the president himself is impelling that. I mean, would you really want to make a long-term commitment? And also, the biggest, in my opinion, the benefit of the United States, which is gathering of intelligence, the intangible side as well, that's also being attacked. So, you're talking about a very long-term, not only tangible, but intangible negativity here.
All right, Steve, what are we to make of the fact that Trump fired the federal government official in charge of labor statistics and of his accusation that the latest job number revisions were rigged to make him look bad?
Well, this is what I call Caracas on the Potomac. This is the kind of thing that Madeira does in Venezuela. Venezuela has the world's highest inflation rate right now. And if any economist in Venezuela, in Caracas, talks about the inflation level in Venezuela or the Bolivar's exchange rate relative to the dollar, they go to jail. So this and the Potomac, Trump is in the same game. This gets back to the comment about moving towards authoritarianism. This is what's happening. This is unprecedented in the United States. I mean, we've been on the slippery slope going that way as the executive office of the presidency gains more and more authority, which, by the way, was never intended by the founders of the U.S. Constitution. This came roughly in about the year 2000. It accelerated. All presidents want more authority. That's always in the picture. When I was with Reagan, all the people around Reagan said, well, we could just do a lot more if Reagan had more executive power. Well, Reagan actually was pushing back against that. He didn't want more executive power because that's not enshrined in the U.S. Constitution. The executive is the one who is supposed to implement the laws that are promulgated by the U.S. Congress. That's the only thing the president is supposed to do. Now you can see what Trump is doing. He's basically making his own law.
Harry, we saw in Katya's report Trump humiliating Fed Chair Jerome Powell. He called him a stubborn moron in a series of social media posts on Friday and called on Federal Reserve officials to seize control from Powell if he fails to cut interest rates, just days after the FOMC held them steady for the fifth consecutive time. Why is Trump so focused on lowering rates, which were, given that jobs report that he was so unhappy with, likely to fall sometime soon anyway? And what's happening with inflation? Trump insists it's been slayed. Has it?
Well, I'm not sure that if it was on its way to being slain, it's, now the uncertainty is going to be somewhat of an engine for inflation. But I think at the same time, the uncertainty is going to slow down the economy. And as you noted, and I've written about in the last 24 hours, by firing the commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is the office that produces these numbers, which is always tightly secured numbers. And I know, because when I was on the Council of Economic Advisors, we used to get those numbers the night before the rest of the world knew. That is really, a dictator-like behavior. I mean, I was beside myself, not emotionally, but professionally when I saw that. And as you note, when we saw the revised numbers for the last 2 months on job statistics, that was ammunition enough probably for Powell and the rest of the FOMC, the Federal Open Market Committee, probably to begin now to lower interest rates. Now with Trump's behavior, I think that the whole apple cart has been upset. And what makes the United States stand above the rest of the world is our independence and economic decision making. That is really going into the gutter. It's really, I don't want to overstate things, but it's quite frightening, at least in my experience. And a lot of my work beyond working in the United States in economic policy is in emerging markets, in China, in India, really tougher markets, frankly, and tougher political economy situations than the U.S. The U.S. under Mr. Trump is veering towards that, direction. And what I'm looking for is some kind of leadership from Capitol Hill, as much as that frightens me to say, and I used to work on Capitol Hill, but who's going to rein in Mr. Trump? Maybe the markets will, I don't know, but he's surrounded by a bunch of people who have been very prominent in the news trying to, quote, negotiate, unquote, trade deals. Everyone is intimidated by giving him tough news or giving him advice about how to operate. So the proverbial checks and balances that really, keeps the United States head and shoulders among the rest of the world, those checks and balances have disappeared for the moment. I'm not sure how we're going to resurrect things.
So, Jarek, can nations like Japan and blocs who've already negotiated trade deals with Trump, albeit on worse terms, than they were before. Now, rest easy, do you think, given everything that we've discussed here? Or does the threat of increased tariffs still hang over them if President Trump feels that these countries have stepped out of line? Is he using tariffs as some form of blunt foreign policy weapon here?
Yeah, definitely. He is using that as a weapon, as a bargaining tool. And again, the worst thing about, this regime is that the unpredictability is so high. Tomorrow we could be talking about exactly the same subject on a totally different number, with totally different agenda. So, this is one of the biggest problem about, this Trump, administration, is that it is so unpredictable. It is so volatile. So that, it's very difficult for corporations or the government to basically create a milestone. We don't know what he has under his sleeves yet. For example, countries like Japan and Taiwan, we're very much reliant to the U.S. on security issues. And we're all for, fighting against the hegemony of China. But, what Trump is doing is going totally the other way around, because Japan and Taiwan or any other country in the world are almost forced to basically, have a much stronger alliance with the likes of China or other nations, which is not necessarily favorable as far as, free world trade is concerned. So, what he's doing is extremely counter-effective about the, certain, I would say, grasp of hegemony by the United States and the free world alliance.
Steve, what does all of this mean for countries who are yet to sign a deal with Trump? Switzerland, which has been hit with what? By a tariff rate of 39%. Canada, 39%. Syria, 40%. Serbia, 35%.
Well, let me just, Adrian, back up just a little bit and make a couple, actually 3 points. Basically, 3 falsities that have been behind what Trump is doing in the trade sphere. One, he contends that foreigners cause the U.S. trade deficit to be what it is. And the answer to that is no. The reason we have a trade deficit is because the U.S. spends more, Americans spend more than the GDP level in the United States, and the gap is made up by what? The trade deficit. So he has the causality. He doesn't understand what's causing the trade deficit. And he claims that it's bad. Well, no, it isn't bad. We've had it since 1975, and it's easy for the U.S. to finance the fact that they spend more than the GDP level in the United States. So that's the first point. The second point where he's wrong is that tariffs will reduce the trade deficit. No. The spending in the United States by Americans, as long as it exceeds the GDP, the trade deficit won't be affected by tariffs. And the third thing he keeps harping about that's completely wrong is that somehow the U.S. government is going to collect a lot of money. This is a great deal, and we're going to get it from foreigners. No, Americans pay a sales tax on everything they import when they make the importation. Foreigners don't pay the freight for tariffs. These are sales taxes imposed on Americans. This is the biggest lie and sham going on and con job that I've ever heard.
Okay, Harry.
Now,
all right, yeah, very quickly, Steve, very quickly.
By the way, Adrian, the foreigners do get damaged. There is a cost imposed on them, but it's not the revenue coming in from the tariffs. That comes from Americans' pocketbooks.
Okay. Steve, quickly jump in on that. I've got about a minute to give you here because I want one final question to Seijiro. But you agree with what Steve was saying, yes, Harry?
Oh, yes.
Absolutely. I mean, it's this man apparently went to Wharton for his undergraduate education, and he still does not know who actually pays tariffs. It's quite striking. And he thinks, as Steve said, it's the foreign country that pays the tariff. No, it's U.S. consumers, it's U.S. workers, U.S. industry. I just don't know who is advising him, or if they are advising him, they are too intimidated to teach him. It's not a question of correcting him. It's actually trying to teach him. As I say, the wheels are coming off the wagon, unfortunately. It's really a sad outcome.
Do Americans know that? They must know. They must hear all this furore about tariffs, and here's President Trump telling them that it's a good thing. Do they know that they are the ones who are going to be out of pocket because of the tariffs?
Well, they should, because when the prices rise on the imported, commodities or imported services to the United States, we are the ones, the U.S. citizens are the ones who are paying that higher price. It's not the folks who are producing the goods who are paying the price. They're not taking in as much income as producers. But first and foremost, it falls out of Americans' pocketbooks and wallets.
Okay. Harry, many thanks. Seijiro, what does all of this mean for the rest of us? If it's American consumers who are paying for increased tariffs, even if they're being told that they're not paying it, or if they don't realize that they are, what do increased tariffs on goods that the rest of the world produces mean for those of us like you and I who don't live in the US?
Well, it's basically revival mercantilism back in the 19th century. And it's not going to do any good for any growth model, which has been based on globalization and advancement of innovation in the past 20 years, especially 20 to 50 years. So this is obviously very negative, not only from the economic sense, but also from the intangible issues, which I was talking about, which is trust to our leaders in the free world, which is the United States, which I think has really lost the ground. And I think the consequences of that will be seen and felt unfortunately, in much more longer term than we want to see.
Gentlemen, there, I'm afraid we're going to have to end it. Many thanks indeed for being with us today. Harry Broadman, Seijiro Takeshita, and Steve Henker. And thank you for watching. You can see the program again at any time by going to the website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, join us at our Facebook page on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Or you can join the conversation on X. Our handle there is at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finighan, and the team here in Doha. We'll see you again. Bye for now.
Don't miss out. Get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news, expert insight. Like, share, stay ahead.